the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals, and on the line with me is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site, and then, of course, one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We're at episode 394. This is our normal Tuesday show. As you guys, if you've been listening, you've noticed we have over the last couple of weeks, we're changing formats slightly. Going to be adding more shows over the course of this off season. Maybe each edition of the show might be a little shorter. So maybe it won't be the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, but it might be over the course of the year, the best hours of Cardinals talk on the web. But we're in episode 394. We recorded last on a Sunday night after the NFC Championship game and the AFC Championship game, and we talked about those games and kind of a Cardinals lens, what we could take away from those two wins, the Eagles going on to the Super Bowl to play the Kansas City Chiefs. But we have more head coaching news. Seth, if you want to plug your podcast, the original Draft Breakdown podcast, especially since we are full on in draft season. We just had the NFL PA Collegiate Bowl over the weekend. The Senior Bowl and the Shrine Game are coming up this week. So there is lots of content, and I'm sure you guys are breaking it all down on your show.
Yeah, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode where we look at, the Shrine and Senior Bowl weigh-ins and kind of the numbers that came from that. We looked at the NFLPA game, and that was really interesting because, those are guys that don't get the big love, but
those are maybe some day three guys and some priority free agents.
Day three guys, fill out the roster guys that end up being, key contributors on special teams and stuff like that. And every once in a while you get a hidden gem in there. And so, that was the big thing. So yeah, it's the best time of year with the All-Star games and now, the Super Bowl right around the corner or the big game, whatever we have to call it. I don't know what the rules are.
We can call it the Super Bowl because we're not advertising.
and then we head to, free agency or the NFL Combine, free agency, and the draft. So it's, like you said, it's the best time of year and the best time to subscribe if you want more information.
Absolutely. But in this edition of the show, we will focus on the Cardinals head coaching search as there's more news. It's just 2 nights after we last recorded a show, but there's still more stuff to talk about. And we'll talk about Kyler Murray and his injury. We pushed that to this show because there was more talk about there. But we will lead with the news of, there are 2 candidates now off the board still for the Cardinals. They lost out on Frank Reich. He was hired by the Carolina Panthers. He was kind of the guy. For me, I felt he was a nice fit. I felt he was a nice fit in 2018. Next off the list is DeMeco Ryans. He officially and now has been named the head coach of the Houston Texans. That we should have seen that coming, especially since he did cancel his interview with the Cardinals 2 Saturdays ago before the divisional round game. But at that point, we weren't sure if it was a cancellation or a postponement, but it was essentially he had heard what he needed to hear from the Texans, the team that drafted him, where he made a name for himself in the NFL. And that was all she wrote. Once the 49ers were eliminated, he was free to then sign a contract, and that is now official. DeMeco Ryans is head coach of the Houston Texans. And then the other big fish of the coaching carousel this offseason is Sean Payton. And apparently he is now off the board for the Cardinals as the Denver Broncos appear to be set to sign him to be their next head coach. The big domino that was needed was an agreement with the Saints for compensation to allow Sean Payton to be hired by another team. Payton, who was head coach of the New Orleans Saints for 15 years, he retired after the 2021 season and is still technically under contract through 2024. So for the next 2 years, had any, like this season and next off season, had he wished to coach again, like this offseason, then the Saints were entitled to compensation. They could block Sean Payton from signing anywhere because, contractually he is still bound to New Orleans. You can't just retire and go somewhere else until the terms of your contract have been met. And it's wasn't cheap. The Broncos reportedly are willing to give up this year's first round pick, the 29th pick in the draft. And that's the pick that they received from the Miami Dolphins in the Bradley Chubb trade, which was originally the San Francisco 49ers trade that came in part of their deal to move up to get Trey Lance. So that draft pick has traveled a little bit, was the San Francisco 49ers, then the Dolphins. Now it is the Broncos, and now it will belong to the Saints if Peyton and the Broncos agree to a contract. They will also give up their second-round pick next year in 2024 and win a pick swap with the Saints, who will give the Broncos their third-round pick. Seth, you and I were talking about this off the air, and it feels like, New Orleans, the Saints as an organization seem to be dead set on one thing, and that was recouping picks that they had lost, that they had given up in deals that they made last offseason, where they acquired. So their first-round pick this year is now the Eagles, and that happened with their trade to acquire a second first-round pick that they then parlayed into moving up in the draft to get Chris Olave. And so they gave up this year's first-round pick and next year's second-round pick. It feels like that was the minimum that they were looking to do. They wanted a first this year and a second next year to get back from their picks that they gave up to get Chris Olave.
Yeah, and people were like, well, the Cardinals could have given up this year's second and next year's third, and it would have been equivalent. It's like, that's fine, but the other team has to accept that. Like, while the equivalency in the trade value chart might be the same, the reality is the other team has to say yes. And I don't think that was going to happen. It sounds more like the Cardinals would have probably had to give up this year's first and next year's third, or this year's second and next year's second. And, that's going to be probably two, depending on when Kyler Murray's back, that's probably two top 40 picks.
Yeah, and
he's a really good coach.
Yeah.
But,
I was going to say
that's a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, trade value, the value of getting the first round pick this year, number 29, and then a pick swap next year, feels like the Cardinals, and Kyle Odegaard, former reporter for the Cardinals, now runs Compare.bet. Trade value-wise, the Cardinals' second-round pick, which is pick number 34 in the draft, and next year's third-round pick would have been equal in value, except for the detail that if the Saints were looking for a first-round pick this year and a second-round pick next year, it just doesn't look that good. That said, I'm gonna take a look at initial, because I put a poll out on should they have pulled the trigger on Sean Payton for this year's second and next year's third. I'm getting that and I'm trying to pull it. Well, let me pull it up on my phone. That Abley should have pulled the trigger. 40% probably is in 16%. So basically 56% of fan base either absolutely and probably should have done it, with another 34% saying probably not and no way. Those two come in fairly, but that's after a couple of hours. It was the one that makes sense, and the interesting part is the fact that it looked like Vic Fangio was going to be out of the picture. Guess what? Apparently back in the picture, and is likely going to end up with with the bruising fit. Interesting fit, honestly, after he got fired as head coach there. The Cardinals could have had Payton and Fangio, which is, as Seth has said, it's the easiest thing to picture in succeeding here because you have two longtime coaches with a track record of success. So you can, the most transferable thing, you could see the offense and Kyler Murray working with Sean Payton. We've seen Vic Fangio's defenses, and so that's the one you could envision, and it's the biggest splash type of thing that Cardinals fans love. And it is, honestly, it would have been really on brand for Michael Bidwill, who likes to take swings like that. That said, how serious do you think Cardinals were after that day-long, hours and hours visit with the Cardinals on Thursday last week?
It's one of those situations where I think they were very serious about trying to get something done, and the reality just became that it wasn't going to materialize with what they were looking for. Like, the reality always becomes you have to have two to tango. And like you said, regarding the Sean Payton situation, right? They interviewed him, they made overtures, and then it was about 24 hours later, Ian Rappaport says they're resetting after interview with Sean Payton. I mean, that just kind of told you right there that the compensation wasn't going to be met. And at that point, it was just trying to figure out like what's next in this thing. But it's going to always beg the question because you're going to start with simple things. Did they go hard enough after Frank Reich? Was he a serious candidate, or were they too focused on Sean Payton? Did they inform Dan Quinn that they weren't going to make an offer for him, or did Dan Quinn turn them down and decide to go back? By the way, that wouldn't just be Arizona, it would be Denver as well. Go back to Dallas. So those are the questions that'll get asked, about this. But the reality is, and I tweeted this out, like, honestly, I don't mind the candidates that are left. Like, Sean Payton was the white whale, but if you had to give up 3 and a third next year, I don't think it's worth it. I don't. And it's just interesting because, I really do think if the Cardinals had made this deal and they had given up the 3rd overall pick, even if it was just the 3rd overall pick, I think a lot of fans would have complained about it. And I think a lot of pundits would have roasted them for giving up too much.
Yeah.
And so it's
the
just
thing for me. It's, a team that needs to rebuild. You've got a new general manager. And suppose they're good at the draft. Why would you give up the premium pick that you've got?
Well, and this is another way to look at it, and this isn't me. I didn't come up with this, so if they're missing something, I apologize. But the Broncos, under new ownership, in the last 2 years, for Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, have traded 3 first-round picks, 2 seconds, a 5th, Shelby Harris, Noah Fant, and a 2024, that was a second as well. Okay, so 3 seconds. And that's for Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. So that's the thing, is like, you're talking about splashes.
And that splash they made last year, epic fail.
Well, and then the other thing is you have to remember too is, and for us, it literally doesn't matter. But the rumor is he's going to get 20 to 25 million a year. So he's going to be one of, if not the highest paid coaches in the NFL. So all of a sudden there comes expectations with that as well, right? Like, now all of a sudden it's not just you have to win immediately, which is an expectation, but you have to be competing for Super Bowls not Super Bowl, Super Bowls.
Thank you, Arian.
Yeah, for like within 2 years when you say, I mean, the expectation would be if Kyler comes back healthy and ready to go, midway through 23 and they look good at the end of 23 and then heading into 24, you should be a Super Bowl contender. But wait, you don't have a first round pick and you don't have a second round pick the next year. So like, you're not going to be adding much to it as well. And so, it's just one of those situations. You and I, and this is the other thing, and you and I have talked about this quite a bit. The Sean Payton infatuation also comes from how easy it is to envision if everything goes right. Right? So you have to envision, you know what a shorter quarterback in his offensive system looks like and what he can do. All right. And then you go to the defensive side, and if they bring on Vic Fangio, which, by the way, is absurd in and of itself, right? That Vic Fangio is going to go back to Denver after they fired him.
Right? That's crazy.
But you know what Vic Fangio's defenses look like. So all of a sudden, you're like, man, the Cardinals hired Sean Payton and Vic Fangio. This is like, when Kyler gets back, they're going to have a great offense. And now they have Vic Fangio and they're able to add Will Anderson. Like, they're going to have a great defense. And you're like, holy cow. But then you have to stop and think. You're like, okay, well, now they can't add Will Anderson because they had to give up that third overall pick. Okay.
Exactly.
So now, you're like, okay, what does he do with Myjai Sanders and Cam Thomas and Marcus Golden? And, that's the thing. It's really easy to visualize because we've seen what that success looks like. Whereas when we talk about Brian Flores, the immediate question is, who's his offensive coordinator? Like, that's literally the first question that comes up, right?
Yeah.
Like, who's his offensive coordinator? When you talk about these other guys, which we'll get to in a short time, that's the question. If it's Mike Kafka, who's going to be his defensive coordinator? If it's Lou Morano or whatever you say, who's his OC? Like, those are the questions that come up. But like Sean Payton, Vic Fangio, you're like, oh, this is great. We know exactly what we're getting. And so I think that is the other side of that coin, is that it's just comforting and it's easy. Like, there's no questions about it.
Yes, absolutely. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to 3 new candidates who now are interviewing this week. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. If there was any sign to say that they probably were out on Sean Payton, or rather Sean Payton was out on them, or they were out on trading what the Saints wanted for compensation for hiring Sean Payton, it was the fact that they didn't go to second interviews with the candidates they'd already spoken to, despite the 3 names that came up of Aaron Glenn, Ejiro Evero, and Brian Flores. Instead, they brought in 3. They have 3 guys they've now brought in this week. The first of which is Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka. Tuesday, he supposedly interviewed on Tuesday. They are set to bring in 2 Bengals coordinators over the next 2 days, Wednesday, Thursday. Lou Anarumo, their defensive coordinator, and Brian Callahan, their offensive coordinator. Very interesting that those can out the Cincy guys, they make sense to be why they now came up, because they were worried they would fill their schedule with other candidates, and the Bengals were now eliminated, so now you can talk to them freely. The Mike Kafka one, to me, is the most intriguing because, one, it didn't seem to be on their radar initially, and 2, the body of work is kind of fun. That's another one you can project and like. But let's look at what his course has been since 2017. He was on the Kansas City Chiefs staff and mostly as a quarterbacks coach, and then quarterbacks coach, passing and coordinator. So who did he work for? Andy Reid. That's a really good coaching tree. Then he coaches Patrick Mahomes. He's his position coach when Patrick Mahomes is putting up ungodly numbers at the quarterback position. Then he gets hired as the offensive coordinator this past season under Brian Daboll for the New York Giants. And not only was he the offensive coordinator, he's the play caller. And the Giants' offense wasn't terrible. And with Daniel Jones, who has been, I don't know, like, it just depends on what you think about Daniel Jones, but he got the best season out of Daniel Jones. It wasn't great. He only had 15 touchdown passes, but the bugaboo about Jones has been this, turning the ball over. And Jones had the league's best interception percentage. He only threw 5 interceptions all season, 1.1%, the lowest in the league. He only fumbled the ball 6 times. This is a guy that was a turnover machine. He had a career high in passing yards, and he used his legs more. He rushed for over 700 yards this past season. So you, under the influence of Kafka, you've got him working with the prototype of the modern quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, and getting the best out of an enigmatic quarterback in Daniel Jones that leads the Giants to the playoffs. I'm super intrigued by that. He's interviewed for other positions, and when you look at what the Cardinals need, to me, it gets me a little bit excited about what he could do with Kyler Murray.
Yeah, and you have to look at this year, and you and I double-checked before we came on the air, something Jess always does, and I never do. But we double-checked before we came on the air to make sure that this was true, that Kafka called the offense this year for the Buffalo Bills. The New York Giants. Sorry. I was thinking about Brian Daboll while I was saying it. So he called the offense for the New York Giants. So not only is he, showing that he knows how to work well with quarterbacks, obviously, you give him some credit for his work with Patrick Mahomes, but you have to give him a lot of credit for Daniel Jones this year. And people are going to say, well, like you said, just 15 touchdowns. Well, okay, he didn't have career year in terms of touchdowns, but he had a career
really well. Now, granted, they have Saquon Barkley, who came back and was great, but they built a great running game, and Daniel Jones complemented that with his legs, and they didn't turn the ball over.
Right, and he had a career year in every other regard. You look at it, he only threw 5 interceptions this year, like you talked about, which is, the career high or career low, I guess, in interceptions. His yards per attempt was highest of his career. His average yards per attempt, his yards per completion, his quarterback rating was 8 points higher than his highest, and his QBR was 5 points higher than its highest. And by the way, he still was sacked 44 times this year. 44. So you look at it, you can't be like, oh, he everything was so much better. No, it really wasn't. The reality was he was able to do more, like you said, completion percentage, yardage, everything but touchdowns was the highest it had been. And then the other thing you got to think about too, and we talk about this a lot, and the scoring offense, 21.5 points per game. Okay, not great by any means. That's fine. But where did their touchdowns come from? And you talked about it, right? So you had 15 touchdowns thrown by him, 1 by Davis Webb, 1 by Tyrod Taylor. So 17 passing touchdowns. They had 21 rushing touchdowns this season, 21, which was 4th in the NFL. So his passing numbers potentially could have been better, but they didn't need to, because they were scoring touchdowns on the ground. And like you said, I think he had 7 this year rushing touchdowns. Yeah. 700 yards rushing and 7 rushing touchdowns. So he had 22 combined touchdowns. So that's the thing, is you look at it, you have a guy that had his career best season under this guy as the offensive coordinator. And, you see a guy that can potentially grow because he's young, with Kyler, and like you said, his work with Patrick Mahomes, with these other guys, that's all stuff that it can build on. It is interesting, because people look at Daniel Jones this year and they're like, oh, career best year, and Kyler Murray's career worst year, and the numbers are almost the same, right? So,
I mean, and there's there was I do a weekly radio appearance usually on AM 1060 KDUS, and one of the things that Dave Bierstein, Rooster Bierstein, came at me at was a stat comparison, and Kyler Murray's year, his player comp statistically was Andy Dalton this year. Gross.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it, obviously there was a lot to it, and one of the biggest things was obviously never having that full arsenal of weapons and then his offensive line at the end of the season. So, but you look at it, and Kafka brings some intrigue. You and I were going over it before this started. Who could he bring in? So his names that are, guys that he's worked with or is currently working with, and there's some intriguing names. A guy that's been with the Cardinals before, David Merritt, could be a defensive coordinator. He's a DB coach in Kansas City. He was a DB coach here. He's been a defensive backs coach for a long time in the NFL. I don't know. He was with Steve Wilkes' crew, so I'm not sure, what type of bad blood, no blood, whatever there is going on there.
And that they did have a good pass defense that year.
Yeah, and so you got, you have him. You've got interesting guys out of KC when he was there that are still, around, and then obviously, like we talked about, his time, or now with the New York Giants, you've got interesting guys like Andre Patterson, who's been a defense coordinator in the league, older guy, so, and then we talked about a guy like a Jerome Henderson, who's been around for a long time and was with the Falcons in the Dan Quinn years, and was their defensive passing game coordinator. So he's been around, done it for a long time, 53 years old. So you look at it, just a couple names, because that's the question, right? With Kafka, it's not who's going to call the offense, it's who's going to call the defense. So that's what you look at. And so there's some interesting names that he can bring with them and kind of create a coaching staff. And that's, something to think about as you think about him as a candidate.
And then we have the other candidates that came up, the coordinators, Alu Anaramu, and then what is there to like? Both from the Bengals, they've been on Zach Taylor's staff the entire time he's been there, and so you can see offensively what they've done. You've seen what they do with, obviously, Joe Burrow. The defense has been pretty solid. So the Bills, which have turned around that team to make it a pretty solid overall team. Anaramu definitely is Anarumo is the of experience as a coordinator, years of coaching in the league. To me, it kind of feels would be like a Vic Fangio hire, longtime coordinator, finally getting a shot. What is there to like about a guy like Anarumo?
I think Anarumo brings that defensive toughness. You see how well the Bengals coach defensively and how well they tackle and things like that. Like they're a team that just puts together solid defensive game plans. He's a defensive backs guy. You would be intrigued with what he brings in terms of developing DBs, and we've seen, Jesse Bates making all pro teams, Eli Apple turning his career around, Cam Taylor this year, being a guy that was really, really intriguing as a rookie. And I think he was like a day 3 rookie. And then you look at their front, like this is a dude that schemed up some really impressive defensive front numbers without, I would say, stars on the team, right? Like they don't have the Bosa or those guys, but you look at Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, Safosai, BJ Hill, like those guys all had really solid seasons. And so I think that all of that would make him an intriguing defensive guy. And the first question you're going to have with him is who is offense coordinator. So you go a name that would be interesting. And he's done a really nice job with their tight ends, and he's the tight end. And we've seen that these tight end coaches have done a nice job. Brian Dable, comes to mind first, but James Casey, I don't know if you remember him. He was in the league forever with the Texans and Eagles a little bit. But he's been a tight end coach with Houston from 17 to 18, so under Bill O'Brien, and then been the tight end coach since 2019. So, a guy, and I know people would be like, well, that's underwhelming. It's like, well, you're not going to go get, the top guy. Like they have to have crossed over. Anamuramu, despite all the years of experience, you look at it, he was in Purdue from 2004 to 2011, and then he was with the Dolphins from 2012 to 2017. So he's not exactly been, despite having been a coach since 1989, he hasn't exactly been around the league. Like you look at it, in the NFL, he's only coached with the Dolphins, the Giants, and the Bengals. That's it. And so, he's cut his teeth. He's done his time, and now he's going to potentially get a shot. And that's why you said it's a little like Vic Fangio. Another interesting guy on the Cincy staff. And again, this is, you kind of are just going by what they have. He's been an offensive coordinator in college, which I don't know, would intrigue guys, but he's, the wide receiver coach for the Bengals. And they have probably the best wide receiver core in the NFL. I don't know how you feel about that, but I would say close to.
It's good. It certainly is good.
and former Arizona Cardinal, so he knows the organization. Troy Walt, again, he's 46, man. That's crazy to think about. But
that's my age.
It's just crazy to think 2006 was 17 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I remember the name. Like that's the crazy thing. But yeah, so he's only been in the NFL for 3 years now. Sorry. So but he has, done a really nice job with those Bengals wide receivers. And you might say, well, yeah, they had a lot to work with. Well, yeah, but let's be honest, like the Cardinals haven't flipped second round picks. I'm not blaming coaches, but I'm just saying, if you want to look at that. So, and then on the other side, Brian Callahan, right?
Yep.
So Callahan, who would he bring? Well, I can tell you who he won't bring, and that's James Betcher, who's the linebackers coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. I shouldn't say that. I mean, Vic Fangio and the Broncos can move on, I guess, maybe, but probably not. Let's,
Well, Callahan does, like, if you look at it, because he's been the quarterback's coach before. He coached Matthew Stafford in Detroit and Derek Carr in Oakland at the time. And so, 2016, 2017, Matthew Stafford, not a bad. Derek Carr has been pretty productive. And now he's worked with Joey Burrow. So the guys he's worked with have been good. And the offense, the Bengals offense has been, like, it's not elite, but it's also a very effective offense. in pretty much all phases. They've gotten production from the receivers. They had a strong running attack. Their offensive line was a mess, and they remade that this year, and it just didn't work out in terms of injuries. And they were able to produce even with problems with protection.
Yeah, and so who would Callahan be able to bring? Again, this is just going off of like the last couple of years staff with the Bengals, who he's had crossover with. But you look at Callahan, a name that's been a defense coordinator in college and been a really good defensive line coach in the NFL is Marion Hobby. He's 56 years old. So, Callahan is what, 30 or 40? He's younger, right?
Yeah, he's
38,
late 30s.
Okay.
Yeah,
38. So, so he was with the Jaguars in 2017. Went to the AFC Championship. He's part of that Brian Flores coaching staff in 2019-2020 with the Miami Dolphins. That you saw them kind of overhaul their defense, and we've talked about that 2020 Dolphins team, right? Like how good they were defensively in Flores' second year. He's Hobby's a big impact on that. And then we just talked about how good the Bengals defensive line is now. And he's the guy that coaches that. So again, called defense for Duke, was the co-defense coordinator for Clemson. Their year they won the national championship in 2016. Defensive line coach for the Jags, the Dolphins, the Bengals. So a guy that's been around the block. That's and then another guy that's really, really, and I doubt would be interested in being a DC in. Their, what do you call it? A senior defensive assistant specialist, whatever. Mark Duffin around literally since, he's going to be 70 this year. He started in 1975 as a coach. So we're talking, he's around. But he was the DC in Tampa in 2018. He's been with the Bengals since 2019. So, a guy that's been around the block, worked with the linebackers in Tampa, in 2016 to 2018, the Dolphins, the Jags, the Packers. So again, this is a guy where you talk about like being able to pull guys from around the league, right? This is the guy. Whereas, like we talked about with Anaramu, he just hasn't been many places. Like he goes somewhere and he's really successful and he doesn't get fired, which is a different approach.
Right. When you just take Steve Hyden, who just left the Cardinals for the Bengals, he survived 3 different coaching staffs. He'd been with the Cardinals for 10 years. He was on Arian's staff, he was on Steve Wilkes' staff, and on Kingsbury's staff. That's right. That's hard to do, honestly.
It's very hard to do. And so you look at it, you've got, and I'm kind of going through their stuff. You've got Brian Callahan was with the Raiders in the first year back of John Gruden. So what a guy like Rich Baccia, whatever his name is, who was the running, Bisaccio, would he be interested in, coming on board? He was a quarterbacks, wide receivers coach, running backs coach in college, did all that stuff forever. And then assistant head coach and running backs and stuff. He's been around forever. So that's the thing, is you just kind of have to look at where they've been and then kind of throw darts, right? Because that's kind of usually how that stuff works. But I think all 3 have intriguing trees that they can go through that are not awful and that aren't exactly ones that you're necessarily you don't like. And I'm going back actually, and Callahan worked with Jim Bob Cooter when Cooter was the OC in Detroit, and people might be like, well, that sucked, but he's with the Jags this year as their passing game coordinator. You look at the work he's done with Trevor Lawrence. Again, you just have to dig around and find where these guys were and how it worked out. And, again, we won't know until they're hired, because again, and that's why again Sean Payton was everybody's favorite, right? Because it was like, oh, this is really easy. Well, this is really tough because we're talking about guys that
most of the we've barely heard of, and then common listeners, normal fans that listen to the Cardinals, they might not have ever heard of.
Right. You don't know who the defensive line coach is for Cincy. Like, that's not something. The only reason you know who the linebackers coach is because it's James Betcher. You know who that guy is. So, like, those are, that's the type of stuff that you go through and kind of works through things. And so we'll see. But those three are intriguing. For you, like, out of those three, which one intrigues you the most? Is it Kafka?
It is Kafka. Honestly, it is Kafka for me.
Yeah, I think Kafka is the most intriguing. I like Anaramo, but again, like the cop out, right? I just want to know who his OC is going to be. But we talked about this the other day. The concern I have, and I think you brought up Fangio, and that's a great, kind of name to pull from. Fangio had a little more DC experience, but Anaramo is kind of the same type of guy. Been around the league for a long time, always kind of been the background guy. Would he be good as the head, and can he deal it from the best unit we're talking about and defense? I mean, his and what he's built over the last 2 years is phenomenal. But and Fangio's a great example of that, and he was about 5 years older than Anaramo. So if you wait 5 more years to hire Anaramo, they have much more similar backgrounds. It didn't work for Fangio. It didn't. And that's the reality of it. Like, some of these guys are great at calling defenses, and they just aren't good coaching.
Coming up next on the Rise of Possible Cardinals Talk on the Web, we'll move on from the coaching talk to move on to talk about Kyler Murray and his comeback from his ACL. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Kyler Murray, a photo of him looking, longingly, kind of thoughtfully and pensive, you could see the scars on his knee. It wasn't the first one. Apparently his dog, Swoosh, had some knee surgery because they showed matching staples in their knees. That said, the report that came out on Sunday, and Seth, I was telling you this before the show, I was like, why? What is it about the Cardinals organization that has to seemingly embarrass their franchise quarterback? And on the surface, it doesn't seem like much, but the fan base and some of the local columnists and opinionists have kind of taken it to, let's say, adding to the Kyler Murray narrative. And Ian Rappaport comes out and said, Kyler Murray not likely going to be ready for the start of the season, and don't expect him, maybe it won't even be midseason, saying that he's going to take his time coming back. He's going to make sure it's 100%. He wants it to be right because he's got a long career ahead of it, suggesting that he's not going to try to come back and perform early. We've seen other quarterbacks come back quickly. Joe Burrow, when he came back, you could tell he wasn't 100%, but still wanted to get back on the field fairly quickly. Carson Palmer, when he suffered his knee injury, was back and ready for a full go for that 2015 season. And it's interesting. Now, on the surface, it makes sense. You want to make sure that you come back correctly from that knee injury so that it doesn't mess up the rest of his career like we've seen other quarterbacks, other players do. Especially the one that comes to mind is RG3, who's never the same after he came back from his injuries. The interesting thing about this is that, and this is something you can confirm from contacts you have, and again, citing Kyle Odegaard from Compare.bet, a former team reporter for the Cardinals, so he does have some inside information, is that report does not come from the Kyler Murray camp. The message from the Kyler Murray camp is not, we're taking our time. And to hear that and to hear that that's what you have heard as well from people within the Kyler camp is it makes it look bad again. Like what are the Cardinals doing? Because the way it's worded, it makes it sound like Kyler himself is just taking his time and he's not working hard to come back 100%. What is it about this organization that can't seem to get out of its own way when it comes to their star quarterback?
That's the $1 million question. Like, if Bidwell doesn't like him, then why did you give him the contract, right?
I don't who is it within the organization saying that? Because all you have to do, if you don't want to make it sound like Kyler Murray is a schluff and he's not working hard, and he's not a gamer. All you have to do is to say the Cardinals. The Cardinals aren't going to rush Kyler back. They want him to come back 100%. That would be on brand, honestly, because that is what they did with his hamstring. They did rush him back because they had a quarterback they trusted. They wanted to make sure that he could play at a high level. If the Rappaport report had said the Cardinals, they'd like to get him back early, but they won't be disappointed if it's not until like mid-season because they make sure that his knee is 100% before he gets back out on the field. That would be way different than saying Kyler's taking his time from his injury, making it sound like he's just playing video games and just collecting a paycheck when we know that's not Kyler. We know that's not Kyler. He's played through injuries before. The times that he's been off, it has been the organization telling him, no, we're going to go with this route.
Yeah, and it's just interesting, like you said, to continue to throw your franchise quarterback under the bus, and it's a bad look for the organization as a whole. And quite frankly, there's a reason that they've failed for so long, right? And sometimes it's little stuff like this. And AQ Shipley was on the Pat McAfee show today. I don't know if you saw that, but kind of going at them about their facilities and the fact that they haven't updated or upgraded the facility in Tempe, like the practice facility, in forever. And it's really intriguing because it seems like for an organization that is so old that at some point they would listen, right, to like what is said about them. But instead, it just seems like they kind of put their fingers in there and just go, no, not us, and then throw their quarterback under the bus. Like, oh, he's taking his time. It's like, no, I mean, the reality is he's got to come back and work into a new system. So, like, instead of being able just to rehab and come back to the system he knows, he's going to have to rehab and then get in sync and learn the new offensive system all at the same time. And those are that's a lot more difficult than it is just coming back from an injury.
Absolutely. And so the question then comes to itself. Do you think that Kyler, compared to other quarterbacks, is soft with injuries? That he is less able to play through injuries than other players in the league, than other guys. Then when you got like a Brock Purdy, who granted he wasn't able to do anything. You got Patrick Mahomes playing like Budda Baker did on this high ankle sprain and doing that sort of thing. Is Kyler a softer player? Does he lack the moxie and the gamesmanship and the drive that some other face quarterbacks have?
I don't think so. I mean, we've seen him come back. In the LA Rams game with the high ankle sprain, and he just wasn't able to perform. We've seen him, stick it out when he has been injured and then miss games after, like in the Minnesota Vikings game, right, where he tweaked the hamstring and played through it the whole time. And and didn't come out. And so that's the thing, is I think people want to put every situation on Kyler and be like, see, look at this. And it's like, all right, well, Kyler probably could have played if you didn't ask him to throw the ball at all, right? Like when he had the shoulder injury. Oh, wait, he did play. And then we criticized him for not playing well. I mean, that's the thing, is like, he's played through injuries. I think you and I counted it 3 times, but it might have been twice.
His rookie year, it was the finale. He played through the hamstring because they felt that it was really important for him to play every single game. He played through the shoulder in 2020. Then he played through, well, he came back at the end of 2020 on the high ankle sprain in the same game. He came back after missing 3 games with the high ankle sprain in 2021, and you could tell he wasn't 100% after that. He was limited his mobility, so he was able to play, but he was not able to do Kyler Murray things. And then this year he played through the hamstring until he couldn't play through the hamstring.
Right. And then he probably came back a little too soon and blew out his knee. So
and that is the other thing. Was the hamstring and then the coming back from that lead to the ACL tear? I mean, that's another thing.
And so, that's the thing, is like, I don't know. It's just a weird obsession that if Patrick Mahomes did this in the AFC Championship, in the playoffs and in the AFC Championship game, that we know for a fact that Kyler Murray wouldn't do it. And it's like, based on what? And when you ask him that, well, his history. Okay, so when he played through the injuries, what did you say? Well, he didn't really play through injuries. Well, we just listed out every injury he's played through and went through, and when he came back and how long he was out for. He's never taken the 8 weeks or 12 weeks that the ankle sprains that.
You remember Jimmy Garoppolo was like coming back too early from that ankle injury in what year was it? 2020, 2021 was disastrous. He re-injured it, and he basically, his 2020 or 2021 was a mess as a result.
And so the other thing is, and this is, always intriguing to me, is when you look at those things and you say, well, he wouldn't have done it, and you ask, like, well, how do you know? And what is your, not your, but like, what is your gut says is, I know for a fact that he won this. And it's like, I would love to know how you can factually state something right without knowing. So it's just intriguing, man. I've never met a town that has,
this fan base is hell bent on being upset.
Well, and not just that, but like had so many negatives about a kid his entire career. I mean, remember, there was literally people that said, I'm never going to be a fan again because
they gave up on Josh Rosen.
Yeah, because they gave up on Josh Rosen, right? Who's failed, but that was wrong. And then now I'm not going to be a fan again because they extended Kyler. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, if your problem is with Kyler, then go be a fan of a different team, like, until he leaves. So like it won't kill you, I promise. Like, go be a fan of a different team. And then when he's gone, and they're back to the Ryan Lindleys and John Skeltons and Kevin Cobbs and those guys, you guys can be super excited for the year and then complain about it for the rest of the year. And then then the next year we'll have another guy and then another guy, and we'll just keep doing it, and eventually hopefully we'll like one other backs that we have that's young and is able to play at a high level for longer than like 30 games. I mean, that's the thing is, people love Kurt Warner and Carson Palmer, and they basically played like 35 to 40 good games for the Cardinals, and they're like this greatest quarterbacks they've ever had.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah. And doesn't that upset you? that the greatest quarterbacks they've ever had maybe played a combined 5 seasons total.
Right. Well, then you go back to Jake Plummer, who, he was magical in '98, but you look at his numbers. He had.
I was gonna say I don't think he ever put up numbers like Kyler did.
No, and I think maybe once. I don't even know. I have to go look back. I can't remember if it was never. Maybe once he didn't have more interceptions than touchdowns in a season for the Cardinals. Now, he was much better with the Broncos, but his time with the Cardinals, I do not believe he ever had more touchdown passes than interceptions. I think one year might have been I can double check. I'm going to fact check myself on that because I've cited that I've cited that stat before. I don't want to sound like a moron more than I normally do.
No,
Jake Plummer.
Yeah, Plummer 15-15. 9 and 24.
Okay, he had one season, Cardinals of 2001, where he had more than 15-15, 17-20, and that was the playoff year. 1999, 9 and 24. He was off. 13 and 21 in 2000, then 18 and 14 in 2001, 18 and 20 in 2002 before he went on to Denver, where he went 15-7, 27-20, 18. Jeez, that's Jake Plummer.
Yeah, I was going to say 30 and 52 as a starter. 90 touchdowns to 114 interceptions. And so that's
awesome.
That's what I'm saying. Like, and you look at it like Palmer played 6 games, which is about 3.25 years, 3.25 seasons for the Cardinals. He had 105 touchdowns to 57. For 5 seasons, he played in C1 games, 27 and 30 as the starter, 100 touchdowns, 59 interceptions. It's only Palmer had a winning record in Arizona. That's it, and it's just intriguing to me how strong the dislike is for a guy that's 20 and 31 in his career, 84 touchdowns to only 41 interceptions, and he's only played in games. So it's like, it's like, so we'll see. I mean, I get it. Like we'll see how it turns out this year and the next year. But the other thing is this. You mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo injury. You look at Kyler had his surgery, 2 weeks after the injury, 3 weeks after the injury, it was
right about a month because it was just after the start of the year.
And so 4 weeks after the injury, he has his surgery. And we look at it and go, you mentioned Joe Burrow. Burrow was injured in, was it October or November for him?
I don't remember.
So he was injured in November. And so, and he played, he came back for the start of the season. So he was about a month ahead of Kyler. So, again, same offense, same system, same all of that. So that's something to think about. But I was going to say, look at Odell Beckham. Odell Beckham couldn't get cleared medically this year. I mean, and we cited an actual study on this show. And it's still this baffling thing to people. There are people that take 9 months. There are people that take 12 months. There are people that take 15 months. And there are people that will never recover. That's literally the science of it. You hope that he's one of the 9-month guys. But even in 9 months, that would be October. Literally, that would be October. So he'd miss 2 or 3 games. I just don't always understand it, but I know math's a really hard subject for a lot of people. So maybe that's why it's just asking too much.
With that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up Sierra podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk web. I probably will do a solo show later on in the week. We'll see what happens moving on after that, but we will have some Super Bowl content next week. I know I will have an anecdote to tell about Patrick Mahomes and how he hosed the Cardinals and tricked his way and kind of schemed his way into the Chiefs trading for him. But yeah, that'll be coming up next in the next few days. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Roll!